Hi everyone, it's Sabine VdL, and today I will be talking to Arnas Laurynas from Quantera Global. We decided to address the topic of transfer pricing. Did you know that transfer pricing is actually a complicated subject? It involves a company charging other companies within the organization for goods sold and services rendered. And this can cause a lot of issues when one part of the business wants to charge another part of the business too much for something. So we felt that was a very important topic to address for startup, scale-ups, and grown-ups. So let's get started. I'm so excited today to be with Arnas Laurynas, Managing Director of Quantera Global, and we are going to talk about transfer pricing. So today, Arnas is going to talk to us about why transfer pricing, why it is important, and why firms, whether big or small, need to look at transfer pricing as a strategic way to grow their business. And so welcome, Arnas, and thank you for accepting the invitation. I would love for you to introduce yourself, introduce Quantera Global, your firm, and tell us what is transfer pricing from your lens, please.
Thank you, Sabine. Thank you for having me here. I'm very pleased to be speaking with you, and hopefully this will be enjoyable and entertaining, even though the subject is quite dry and complex. So maybe a bit about myself, starting from the brand I represent, Quantera Global. Quantera Global is a network of transfer pricing consultancies. We are in a number of countries. We're not that big, but we effectively compete with the big consultancy networks, like you might know the audit Big Four, like EY, PwC, and Deloitte. And we compete in a very niche subject of transfer pricing, which is a fascinating and complex one. And we, at the same time, believe we can do the same, just better and cheaper. And that's effectively our pitch to the market. I myself, the official role is the managing director of London office. But then I like to think about myself, or I feel that I am a professional storyteller. So effectively, the stories I tell are very sophisticated and complex stories, but they have to be grounded in the reality of the business my client is in and the business they're operating. That being said, they also have to align with all those international tax rules and regulations, as well with the thick book of guidance for transfer pricing, and have to be simple and convincing enough for the tax authorities to look at it and agree with how we present the case for the business to run their transfer pricing. For me, the biggest focus, or the area I work in quite a bit since I joined Quantera Global, is startups and scale-ups in the digital economy. My background is a bit financial, let's put it that way. So I used to work in an M&A team, so working with deals with asset managers, with funds, portfolio companies. So that financial aspect still remained in working with startups and scale-ups. So I'm quite interested to maybe delve a bit more deeper in the FinTech and InsurTech at the same time as just presenting a broad strokes on transfer pricing.
About that, and I think it is super important to remind ourselves that transfer pricing is not just for the big companies. More and more startups, scale-ups, grown-ups need it if they want to scale across Europe or other markets.
Yes. And I think the way you presented transfer pricing is a very good, concise, practical way of how transfer pricing works. I mean, it is not necessarily, let's say, technical subject, but it's actually a reality of every business that has more than one company within the business, or in some cases, even within the business, you have several business segments where you do need to apply transfer pricing, because effectively what it should be doing, and where the origins of transfer pricing come from, is I would say it was maybe in 1970s, 1950s, where you really see the international business starting to take place, and how you make payments to each other effectively is transfer pricing. Now, the current interpretation, and where I'm the expert in, is the interaction between that and the tax setting. Because effectively, as soon as you move profits from one, or money from one country to the other, there might be some one or both parties that are not extremely happy that that transfer happened, even though that transfer in most cases is for business reasons, for a legitimate transaction that would have taken place between unrelated businesses.
So Arnas, can you give us a great definition for scale-up and startups and grown-ups around what is transfer pricing?
That's a good one. It usually, I have so many of these discussions, because for scale up or startup even more so, transfer pricing, this usually hits out of nowhere, because they just trying to create a product, they're trying to create an organization, they try to enter the market, and then at some point they would have to establish another entity in a different jurisdiction. And then the question almost appears how to fund that new company. And people tend to do very practical approaches of like, okay, let's just make sure that they have some money in the bank account. And sometimes it's even the same bank account. And you just kind of start on that position that you just have to make it a funding issue, or running the operations in a way that where you don't have issues paying in that foreign country. Now, what they don't realize, that they are setting the fact pattern, which has a lot of technical aspects which relate to tax. And then the tax authorities might take it and say, guys, you're wrong here, and here's the money you pay us now with the fines and the late payments. The challenge the startups and scale-ups have here is that it's really difficult to find a simple answer in transfer pricing. Well, actually, it's almost never is a simple answer, but they have to have those simple answers, because again, transfer pricing or even tax will not be the core issue being faced in that business. It usually most probably it's not even 100 top 100 issues that business will face. So they have very small capacity to deal with it and to allocate resources and personnel to that. And that's where we come in and say, guys, we know it's complex. We know you need practical solutions. And here's, if you tell us a bit about your business, we will be able to advise you not only on the tax aspects, but also how these issues were tackled by other similar businesses. I think that's where it's not only, and what we've seen again and again, the transfer pricing doesn't necessarily have to be only this dry tax issue where like, here's 3 pages of technical analysis to solve your problem. It usually never is. What usually we say, like, think about these operational, cash flow, commercial, regulatory issues that effectively will create your transfer pricing solution. So instead of saying like, let's delve into the technical aspects of it, we say like, what actual business problems you're trying to solve. And most probably, let's take InsurTech, they might have a regulated business, so all of a sudden the regulator asks them for what kind of operations they're running there. And then that kind of triggers the value that can come out of transfer pricing, not looking at it as this pure tax play, but thinking about it, can we arrange the operations that is the beneficial for our business and then answer the tax question, the transfer pricing question in the process of that.
So what got you into transfer pricing? I mean, it's just one day I said, I'll do transfer pricing.
I'll be honest with you, Sabine. That wasn't the case. Sometimes I have people joining my team and our organization, and they actually say this, like, "Oh, I've studied a bit of transfer pricing. I think it's fascinating. All these international tax aspects that are happening right now." And it wasn't the case for me, for sure. For me, it was a not knowing what to do after I have a degree, and applying to all sorts of different careers, and considering my options, and working in professional services, something that appealed to me. And it just happened that I was entering a tax team, but I was so rubbish at giving the answer to the tax legal question that they say, "Oh, he's an economist, let him do transfer pricing." So that's where I started. And then 15 years later, I'm still there, and the deeper you go, the more intriguing it is. And being able to work so closely and get to, as with every profession, once you get good enough, people start value, and you realize the interesting parts of it. So for me, the interesting parts of it, exactly the interaction between how companies scale and how companies approach difficult problems, and how to kind of create value through this particular technical aspects, which not that many people know much about.
Yeah, it's interesting because what you have highlighted is already two advantages, right? It's around how you scale a business, but also how you make sure that you manage your tax burden in the right way. When you look at transfer pricing, when you want to become a multinational company. So any other advantages, Arnas, we need to consider?
I think because there are so many different problems with transfer pricing, I would want to maybe narrow it down a bit. So the struggle for any fintech or most of fintechs and InsurTechs is not necessarily paying tax, definitely not paying corporate income tax, corporation tax, because they all will be, or 99.9% will be loss making. So, right, so you don't start the day thinking, "Oh, how can I decrease my corporate income tax bill?" Because you have been creating losses, taxable losses in all countries you operated, and most probably will do that for the next 5 years. So there's some asterisks there. So VAT for regulated financial services business, which some of these companies are. We can talk about tech businesses within fintech. They are a bit different, but for the financial startups within fintech, you have to be regulated, and that means you cannot reclaim the VAT on your purchases. So any business, any regular business will take that VAT they have to charge and reclaim it. It cannot be done by fintech and insurtech, and that's where the advantage might come in, because we are talking about the new complex business models and international business in most cases. There is a way to structure it so you're paying the right amount of VAT, not effectively what you have to do if you're splitting your business into something that bears the VAT cost. So on every purchase they have to pay 20% to the government, and the part of the business that doesn't have to do that and can reclaim the VAT. So those are practical, very practical aspects. And here I would mention BREXIT, for instance, And something that the government mentioned as well, that there will be a VAT benefit for the financial services businesses of, I think the number was listed as 800 million or something like that, across the economy. What it means that an InsurTech or a FinTech, which is regulated, that has international operations, might use transfer pricing in the way that saves them a bit on that cost. And the second one, maybe a bit more operational, and I always love this aspect of it, because I already see your eyes glaze once I start talking about the VAT. So let me say another commercial benefit of it.
No, I mean, VAT is a very big an important part. And one thing you actually highlighted as well is that, FinTech and InsurTech, whilst, other businesses, which may be service businesses, may not have to pay tax. I mean, there is a transfer, right? It's just leveled up. FinTech and InsurTech do not have those benefits. So therefore, how do you actually maximize a 20% tax in one market, maybe a 19% in another market, to make your business very efficient? Because FinTech and InsurTech is all about efficiency and cash flow. So
yes,
I think it's a very important topic to address.
Yeah, and also timely one because of this Brexit and the ability to put it in simple words, if you do export those services, financial services, insurance services to EU or any other third party, you might be able to save on the UK VAT, and that's something that is provided by the government itself as the benefit that should be claimed and part of the benefits that Brexit might bring to the financial services business area. But then the commercial aspects and the more exciting and understandable for a common person is scalability, right? So when you think about any startup, it's usually that you start having operations in other countries, and those operations will not necessarily be identical in each and every case. And sometimes that those operations, the way they increase in size over a number of jurisdictions, will create more and more complexities if you don't do it with a simple enough framework. So what the advantage of transfer pricing and looking at it is, once you have a nice structure for transfer pricing, it's a bit of a blueprint, or it should be a blueprint if it's done properly, for how you will be in 3 years and 5 years, and where do you add those locations, and how you increase the staff count so it's efficient. So it gives you this framework where you say, like, oh, actually we have these functions within the business. I can have this function in each of the locations, or I can centralize it in one location. And the transfer pricing usually makes a consideration of that, and then it gives a bit of an operational guidance and saying, like, guys, we have flexibility how we evolve and we grow. Maybe let's grow in a way which is a scalable and tax efficient, hopefully, way of doing it.
And so, when you actually start looking at the highs and the lows of transfer pricing, I gather that when you have too high transfer price, that can lead to a company making losses. And if you have too low transfer price strategies, your competition can take advantage of it. Is that right? Or are there other considerations when you start looking at some of the drawbacks of transfer pricing, at least across Europe, for the scale-ups?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question. I think where you have to be careful, and some companies do have that issue, is where if you don't set the policy and you have a sufficiently big organization, there might be people who will start negotiating the internal transfer prices as if commercial arrangements, right? And then depending on the incentives provided for different managers, you might have the transfer pricing that, as you said, has the prices too low or too high, and it hides the profitability and hides the performance of different products or business segments. So
I think
effectively,
it's super important actually, Arnas, because I think often what I see is that, and having worked with very big companies, we used to have what we call blue dollars and green dollars. So blue dollar is an internal price dollar, and a green dollar is a client paid project, as an example. And what you find often is you end up having your colleagues charging either too, as you said, too high or too low. But when it is too high, you can actually destroy a business. And partly when you start looking at FinTech and InsurTech, early stage businesses, you have to find a way to create a price which allows a business to grow. The minute you're charging prices like a big company, you destroy that business. And there is no incentive actually for that business to even take your price, particularly if your price are higher than the competition which is out there.
I think it's a very interesting aspect of it, and it is true. And it's also a challenge that the startups and scale-ups have to face, because the tax authority might come in from one particular country and say, well, you haven't charged for this, this, and this, and this. Why? And also, I actually was speaking to a client yesterday, and they're trying to launch a media platform. Well, they're not trying to launch their, have a media platform, but it's not at the scale of Netflix. And then there's definitely losses within it. And the challenge there is, okay, a country, a tax inspector might come in and say, like, why is this company bearing all these losses when other companies, other jurisdictions where the platform is provided only kind of takes a fraction of the costs that are related to the platform. And that discussion is a challenge, and you have to explain it not only externally to the tax authorities, but you have to also understand it internally. So you ease, let's say, the plan to the successful operation of a particular product. So that's a very, very valid point. And because most of the product launches are not profitable right from the day one, you will see that again and again and again. And that's the importance also on getting it right and saying, okay, this entity actually has to incur all those costs and shouldn't charge, as you said, the big business would, because it's the commercial consideration. It's not it's not because they want to save on tax on one side or the other side. And that's the let's say the storytelling part kicks in, and how to convey that both internally and externally, and to auditors, for instance. So that's the drawback and the challenge within the transfer pricing in these organizations, for sure.
Yes, it's fascinating, because we all should care about transfer price. And we touched upon the fact that we have Brexit in the UK. And so what's your view of what we should care about transfer pricing when you look at Europe versus United Kingdom or Great Britain?
My initial, well, not the very initial reaction, because that's a bit of a different podcast and different story, but when it happened, what I really realized that access to human capital in single market was a big benefit that startups and FinTech and InsurTech companies in UK had, which is no longer there. So the easy access of saying I need 100 people in the next half a year, very, most probably very experienced in a very specific niches, and you had what's the 500 million or 450 million market with all specialists willing to work in London, is no longer there in the same way. right? So what will happen, and most probably is already happening, and I've heard actually stories of this, the companies and startups in UK will have to establish other companies in the single market to hire people. And that's where transfer pricing comes into play. So that's one operational aspects where I think previously, if you have a startup, you can easily fill in, you know, that 100 position, 80 of them might be filled in by EU nationals. Now those 80 might end up in maybe Amsterdam, maybe Paris, maybe Frankfurt, or maybe spread across the whole EU. So that aspect which is created by Brexit, maybe the government will change the immigration policy slightly, but so far, you know, you don't want to go through visa process as a startup when you're doubling your workforce. That's just not the way to do it. Other than that, there's VAT aspects as I mentioned. Other than that, actually transfer pricing is surprisingly unchanged and unfazed about the Brexit. UK government and HMRC still quite keen to have international cooperation. It's less so through the framework of EU member states, but it's still quite active at the international scale where there's a lot of news coming in. And I don't know, like one of the aspects was the G7 tax plan for the minimum tax rate. So yeah, Brexit changed certain things, changed operationally, definitely things, opened some opportunities for the financial sector firms. At the same time, there's the principles are same and even more important given the let's say more dispersed operations of these startups and scale-ups.
Yeah, it's interesting because when you look at FinTech or InsurTech across the globe, 14% of those are located in United Kingdom. And with potentially the challenge of getting access to resources, and United Kingdom has really good laws for startups and scale-ups, whilst some European countries have more complex ones, and it can be very difficult to set up business in some European countries. But what is really clear is actually talent is still the core of any business. And so businesses will need to go where the talent is. And it would be interesting to see where businesses set up shop to be able to scale and grow their business fast enough.
And yeah, if I may make a comment just on that, I think, let's look at, I have a general feeling, and maybe you're definitely a bigger expert on this than me, but it feels that the FinTech is definitely a bit more ahead of InsurTech in terms of the maturity of the market and maturity of the businesses underneath. We have news that Revolut will be valued at 30 billion for the SoftBank capital raise, things like that, right? So, and then you look at InsurTech businesses, and they're still, let's say, in early stages. Definitely, some are more advanced than not. But then, how did those FinTech businesses got that big? Through this access of think about Revolut and how many operations and how many people they had to hire all across UK and EU in order to make it happen. And I would say Revolut is an interesting one, and very because it is, let's say, more based in UK, but then it's coming from Russian founders, right, with some Central Eastern European connections. So that's something which is a bit of a pity, because InsurTech will have more hurdles to follow the path of the FinTech. I'm sure they'll be successful, but
there are successes. I wrote an article recently on the 23 unicorns we have in InsurTech. And when you look at any market, InsurTech is probably 5-6 years old, maybe 7 if you give it a stretch. FinTech is probably, I would say, 12 years old now. So you need that maturity. And, I remember my team getting their first Revolut cards, in 2015, I think, when we started working together, 2015, 2016, everybody would just have a Revolut card. It's like, it was the done thing. So their scale and a lot of FinTech companies scaling should also be a blueprint for InsurTech to understand some of the hurdles and the opportunities that are available to build growth businesses. So my next question for you, Arnas, is so what is the future of transfer pricing? As you know, we talk about InsurTech, FinTech, and we use a lot of technology. Do you see yourself using more technology, emerging tech, AI, as you actually enabling transfer pricing strategies to take place?
That there's a lot to unpack. I'm interestingly enough, I'm not a strong believer in professional service firms being the most leading, let's say, the cutting edge technology adapters. Let's put it that way. I think what really is tricky with transfer pricing is that it is still a niche and a fraction of the tax, right? And when you think about tax and digitalization of tax, UK government has some good progress on that, but overall, the tax collection and tax audits are still done very manually from the government side, and then businesses then have to kind of embrace that and automate the things they can automate. For transfer pricing, there's definitely a lot of effort to try to automate the, let's say, documentation part of it. Because every single thing you consider or decide or apply, you will need to present it to the tax authorities. And if you need to present it in tax authorities in each single country, on each single operation, it becomes a big exercise. So the automation is big in that area. A lot of players are trying to do that. We also have things like in legal services, they have these AI, research bots and trying to come up with that. I think once they have established those practices, some things might trickle down to transfer pricing. What I would say we see and focus on, and why I'm kind of started with saying that I'm a storyteller. Each business, especially within this innovation sector for startup scale-ups, is quite unique, right? And if it is unique, you can't automate a lot. You most probably could do a bit with AI, but then it's also the scale of these questions, right? It's very complex question in a very narrow niche with a lot of aspects. So I'm positive that in 5-10 years we'll see digitalization of tax on the government side. I think that the big businesses will follow with automation and potentially some application of AI in research. I think for transfer pricing, it might be one of the last things that will be kind of applied to. So we're the slower one in this respect. But if there's people who want to still digitalize a sector, tax is something which is just in the early stages of it. So there's definitely a lot of opportunities there to do so.
It is interesting because when you highlight the level of complexity, you said complex and niche, and you also highlighted you're a storyteller. What you find is, therefore, you need a lot of creativity as well to be able to solve the problem. And usually artificial intelligence is not the most creative, as you know, because it is about automating repetitive tasks. Things which you have done 2 or 3 times, you can actually automate them and therefore take cost out of the business through efficiencies. However, I did have a little bit of a look to see, okay, what are the transfer pricing ventures which are out there? You're right, there are not too many. I found probably 10. And the focus was mainly around, transfer price optimization. So things I think which are very, very simple to optimize. Some estimation, I guess, which will be around, what does that mean when you look at maybe Europe between countries to countries? What would be the estimate? It's probably about simulation and scenario planning. And the one which actually was the most advanced one was around cross-border compliance. So the other 2-3 buckets I mentioned were very, very early stage, like you were saying. And the one which were probably the most sophisticated one was around cross-border compliance. So absolutely aligned to what you are saying, maybe not, the hottest place to be in right now. But, at the end of the day, startups, FinTech or InsurTech, so legal tech ventures come from a small problem, which become bigger across different regions. So I would love to ask you for your last word, Arnas, about, what recommendation you have for the ventures which are there. How can they leverage your knowledge to succeed in a highly complex and competitive marketplace?
I would say the main maybe takeaway is that when you think about transfer pricing within the startup or scale-up business, don't think about it as a necessarily pure tax problem, because it can create quite a bit of value in supporting you organize and streamline the scaling process. It's the let's say raw creativity of a startup and trying so many different things, pivoting 100 at a times just to make it happen. But once you feel that you are on the way making it happen, you feel that there's something there, putting a structure in place that is not necessarily very rigid, but it serves as a guidance on how you scale. And you have to have those answers in the back of it for tax, for transfer pricing, for international regulations. But then if you connect it with the regulatory framework in the insurance services, if you connect it to the money flow and how you use your working capital and use your funds, if you connect it with the scalability of the operations and how a department of 5 people will become 50 people and where they will be based, it's nice to have somebody putting some guidance on like how it could go. It doesn't necessarily have to go, but how it could go. So I think that's the key takeaway. You don't necessarily have to be focused on tax. You don't have to even consider straight away like, oh, does it give you a tax saving? Because in most cases, no. In most cases, it's not about tax saving, but it might still be valuable, and finding somebody who can explain it in relatively simple terms. That's where it's maybe a bit of a tricky part, because I've been 15 years in the field and still learn every single day.
Well, thank you. Simplicity, making complexity simple is really key for us in the venture world. I think another things which you highlighted, which is super important, is about speed to scale. And by understanding the rules, we are potentially able to put the right processes and procedures in place so that therefore we can get the next funding from our investors much quicker. And I think this is a conversation I have with most of the InsurTech I'm talking to today. How do I set up a business which is governance ready and structured so that my investors are comfortable to give me my next round of funding? So that's why I thought having a conversation with you, Arnas, was probably a nice teaser to actually explain to our ventures out there. You have a lot of things to think about if you're going to scale to a billion-size organization. So Arnas, thank you so much for joining me today. And hopefully, if people want to get hold of you, they can go on the Quantera global website, right? So it's Arnas Laurynas. And you can find Arnas on LinkedIn on the Quantera Global as well.
Thank you, Sabine.
Thank you, Arnas.